Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. Our guest today is Jamie Meyer. Let's get into the luxury side of creating a successful business. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thank you for having me, Alicia. I like the luxury. That feels very delicious, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Well, let's start by talking about your business so our listeners have some context. What is it that you got going on? Tell us about what you're doing.
Okay, so what do I not have going on? And I always, when you start your company and everyone's like, you've got to have an elevator pitch. I have never, even when it was just the smallest company, I've never been able to fit my company into an elevator pitch. And that's because when I started it, it was like a million sizes too big so I could grow into it. But essentially, I work with people or professionals and companies to develop a ecosystem. So we work on development of symbiotic relationships with internal and external parties to create some level of success that they haven't reached yet.
Everyone is reaching for a next level. Everyone wants, sometimes they just want the next level, but our big thinkers, they're reaching, like you said, we're talking sometimes 10, 20 levels above where they currently are. Not everyone is positioned to get there. A lot of people are missing critical pieces in their business, whether it is that external support or it's the inner stuff that needs a little bit of tweaking and adjusting. From your perspective, what are you seeing? What are you seeing with your clients? What are their actions versus where they're starting from?
So I'm not going to directly answer that question. I'm going to say something else to kind of answer that question and open up another whole section, because the world has changed significantly. And I'll use my business as an example. So I started my company pre-COVID. I had 2 full-time jobs. I was running 2 companies at the time, and I didn't have time to go physically be in other places. So my company was started from the get-go as a virtual platform. Everything was done virtually. Now, pre-COVID, it was very difficult to convince corporations, small businesses, personal coaching clients that online was the way to create a viable way of doing business. COVID hit 3 years later, and it's completely natural to do this. Now, in the interim of everything as devastating as COVID was, it's shaken a lot of opportunity that companies and people would not have ever considered to explore before, and has now, those gaps that you're talking about, they are so much smaller. The world is so much smaller. The talent gap is so much smaller. The skills gap is so much smaller. Turning your business from, the 8 hours in your country that it would function to a 24-hour business is actually, something that you can create in 10 hours now. So once upon a time, when you said that you didn't have resources, you didn't have access to, there was still a way to do it, but it was a harder slog. It was a halfway up the mountain type feat. Now there is so much more available at people's fingertips, but because they don't work in that realm, because they're used to the stoic idea of what their business has been and what business actually does consist of, they don't realize that it's like discovering a whole other planet.
So I think sometimes it's hard for some of us, like myself, who's been in this virtual world for over a decade, to remember, and even the fact that I work with small business owners that are in physical locations. They have their company with employees that actually come to the physical workspace and they do the physical stuff, whether it's physically typing on the computer in the physical office or it's banging on things in manufacturing or whatever, right? Even though many of my clients are in that sort of conventional business model, because I've been doing business online and on this virtual platform for so long, I'm accustomed to a lot of those resources. Sometimes I forget that it's not common knowledge, especially to a brick and mortar style business, to have virtual employees and all of these different tools and softwares and different things that make this really a functioning, well-oiled machine when you do it properly. I think there's still, though, some people that are kind of tripping over this idea that you can still have a thriving business in this sort of virtual space. So if you scroll through like your Google News feed, if you're like me, you get a lot of business stuff that comes up, and you're hearing all of these different things about this person is saying virtual is bad and every employee needs to be back in the office. And right, it's almost like there's still a lot of frustration and confusion and friction and a lot of resistance to some of these evolutions that we're seeing happening in business. What are your thoughts on this?
First of all, anybody that says anything is absolutely wrong, that's the first thing that you delete from your news. Because nothing is absolutely wrong for everybody. It might be absolutely wrong for you or 500 million of us, but it's not absolutely wrong for everybody. Secondly, and probably something that I should have clarified when I was speaking before, is that I wasn't just referring to online and virtual opportunities. So for example, if we want to stick with the brick and mortar type company, like the conventional structure of a company like that would be that they would, if they wanted to expand, let's say as an example, they wanted to move internationally. So they're an Australian or an American company and they want to go into the other market. They would invest in finding a space and employees and a physical thing that they are culpable for the setup for. And so they're looking at, let's say $10 million investment to just even start something internationally. Throughout my career, even pre-COVID, that is actually not a necessity. You can branch into that market without putting additional pressure on your existing infrastructure, but without making a $10 million capital investment. But people are so used to, like you said, that idea of, them physically owning the business and the space that they're in. When they look to even multiply a physical business, they don't consider that there are still a million other ways to do that. And that actual example is one of the reasons that I started my company. When I started working for a company that needed to move, the whole industry was archaic, but there was nobody that had considered a different way of approaching that same physical infrastructure and growth. So that was when I started doing that and was trying to make connections and relationships to create a different model, but execute the same thing. Then I was like, okay, well, hold on a second, because these other companies that I was working with, they had opportunity to do the same thing in their networks, but I couldn't do anything about that because I was stuck running the company I was running. So then I started freelancing to those people to like create the same physical replication for what they needed without the capital investment. So the idea of things becoming smaller and the online expression of what's available has created more opportunity, even in that physical space of what people are open to considering and the conversations that you can have internationally or nationally in different demographics, instead of being physically restricted with the space that you can afford without that capital injection.
And so that comes kind of full circle to what we were talking about before with when you want to up level. And that is going to involve all of these other pieces now that you've been talking about, right? So you limit yourself greatly when you've got that closed box way of looking at business growth. It doesn't have to be that way. So much more growth, exponential growth is possible if people are willing to look outside of the old model, sort of conventional box, and start to be open to what is possible now.
Yes. And we've kind of had two extremes. So we've got people that are like staying in the old space. And then we've got people that are just only embracing the new space. And there's sort of the middle ground between the two. There's very few that are executing that really well. And it's a little bit like, I suppose, education. You know, education was started for the Industrial Revolution so that we could send people out to factories at the age of 10 years old. And business was the same. The foundation of business was created in a time where there was not anywhere near the kind of vision or availability. I mean, a $500 billion company when business started they wouldn't even know what that kind of money was. So trying to use those old structures to grow in this space is not necessarily beneficial. Some of the ideals that business had and the foundations and frameworks that it has from its initiation of existing, they're still viable and good, but they need to be adapted to fit into that middle ground to meet the new modern version of what business looks like now.
Let's make this very practical for people. When you are working with a client, what does that typically look like? Do you come in and you look at what they got and you get an idea of where they want to go? Give us an example of what that process looks like.
So the process is always the same. Where we start is completely different to each client. So the idea of what we touch is always the same. Where we start and how we execute are always different, because like I said about the guy that says everybody's wrong, the right thing is not always right for everybody as well. So it's a matter of, yes, looking at where they're at, what they have, what they want, or what they think they want. Because, you know, I meet a lot of clients that are like, okay, so I want to turn my $5 million business into a $10 million business. And I'm like, $10 million is like chump change. Let's look at $100 million because you have the potential to go to $100 million if you take it out of this box you have it shoved in. So it's a matter of like what they think they want, what is actually viable to achieve. And more often than not, what's viable to achieve is more than what they have considered. And then assessing where they're going to stumble getting there is the first step. All the things that could potentially get in the way that are not clean and neat and tidy to go to that space. Because the problem that we have is when we start, everybody starts as a small business, right? Nobody walks in at $100 million turnover. So they start as a small business. They just do everything they possibly can to be no longer a small business. And with the growth, there becomes loose threads that kind of happen in the background, and the growth keeps pushing forward, and you think you're moving everything along, but there's just those couple of loose threads that on the, what will we use it as? Like, okay, instead of threads, let's use like the cogs are starting to chip. It's losing the edges on the cogs. And so as you grow, the edges on the cogs will wear down. If those things are not addressed, you get to a point of growth where you basically just recycle it. You spit it out, you pull it in, you spit it out, you pull it in. And then eventually you exhaust everything you possibly can to bring in new business, because you can't keep using old business because you destroyed leads, and then you stagnate and then you have nowhere to go. And it's usually a handful of things that was not picked up from when you transition from a small business into a company, proper functioning company, that are the underlying threads of how that happens. And that can present in a multitude of ways. It can present in bad processes. It can present in mistakes or errors continuously. It can present in low retention. It can present in loss of, like you might get to a certain point of the year, and that's the point of the year where you make all your money and you lose it the rest of the year. Little things. And particularly when companies are doing well and they're on that growth momentum and they keep going, those things are not as noticeable until the market crashes or COVID hits, or there's a new trend that you didn't keep up with and you're scrambling to fix. Like those things then present all the little underlying niggly things that are not as obvious. So I'm a big believer in never waste a crisis. A crisis is your biggest best friend. If you hit a crisis in business, it will tell you everything that you need to fix.
So that is a really high level way of looking at a negative situation. Yeah, I'll just say I love it because I oftentimes will, a new client or even existing client on a call, and they're distraught because usually shit has hit the fan. Something is a real mess in their life. And I will say, as compassionately as I can, this is a good. They're like, fuck you.
You. Yeah. The fuck is your problem? Yeah. Absolutely.
But it's because what you said, it's your opportunity to clean it up, make it right. Then it's no longer an obstacle for you in the future. When you can resolve that, when you can grow beyond that, now you're that much better off in your instance, right? In your line of work, for the company, in my line of work, for the individual. And we do have a tendency to panic when things are not going the way we want them to go. And it takes a really strong individual. Napoleon Hill was talking about it, about, utilizing those adverse circumstances within every adversity is an opportunity. And that is a universal law, which a lot of people don't realize, is everything in this universe is law-based. Every atom has positive and negative, right? Everything has polarity, the good, or what we would consider the good, and the not so good. And that's where we have to be willing to let go of the fear, let go of our resistance to change, and embrace it and say, there's something good for me here. And so buckle up. Let's figure out what that is.
That's the thing about fire. I could talk to you about fire all day, every day. But the thing about fire is they use it, like farmers use it. They'll set fields on fire to regenerate the natural state of soil so that the next year's crops or the next season's crops are better quality. And we don't ever see that in our lives. The amount of clients that, or even people that I speak to that have just one thing, that if they set their life on fire, the one thing would present itself and they could deal with the one thing and they would get on their way. But they keep slapping lipstick on a pig. This little thing went wrong. We'll make this look pretty and we'll fix this and everything will be okay. And that just keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening until you cannot plug the holes on the boat anymore and the ship is hit an iceberg and it's going down.
These are the principles of our lives, and we see it as evidence. We see it in our health. We see it in our business. We see it financially. We see it in our relationships. You see it with your body. You see it all areas of life. But we as human beings are so good at avoiding the things that don't feel good, and as business owners, there is a tendency to just say, well, I just need to be more focused on achieving the goal. I need to push, I need to drive, I need to spend more on ads, or I need to hire that consultant, or I just need to get to that next level, when ignoring those areas that you were referring to, that there's clearly a problem and I just don't want to look at it.
Yeah. And so if you're equally not willing to look at the hard stuff, you're probably equally not willing to look at the opportunity that's in there too. Because when we're in that mode where we're, okay, next goal, we think that we don't have what it's going to take already. We don't have the tools or the resources already to get to the next goal. And if we looked hard enough, the reason that we won't look for the opportunity and what we already have is because we don't want to have to look hard enough for the problem. So we keep going, okay, we need that external thing. We need that external thing. We need that external thing. And it's actually the hard way. I mean, people think that it's hard to look at all the little things, but it's actually harder to keep reaching for the other things. And, like, for example, I met a gentleman who wanted to start this particular business and he had a great business model, but his whole thing was, I'm going to get an investor and we'll start the company with this $10 million investment. And I was like, you don't have a viable business. If you need, like, unless you are in AI or tech and you're going to build a robot or a rocket ship, you do not need $10 million to start a company. You don't need that kind of investment. If you can't get your company off the ground or from level A to level B without an injection of capital that comes outside of yourself, what you're trying to do is not viable.
You had mentioned that when you're working with a client, you're finding those areas, those not quite right areas.
The little niggly things. Like,
yes, you said the little niggly things.
The pain in the back of your knee that you won't go to the doctor about, that thing. Yep.
So, I'm noticing a trend here. When you have, whether it's this particular individual who has this grandiose idea and is sort of maybe looking at the wrong objective, right? There's some kind of avoidance of something. When you're in a business and those things are somewhat well hidden, oftentimes strategically, right? Like you said,
You hide them on purpose.
Let's hide that, right?
Absolutely.
So,
you don't even realize you're digging dirt on top of it, but you are.
Yes. So there are people listening right now who stuff that they've been really like they've developed the proficiency at hiding these things. A lot of people come to me and they've been hiding.
It is really a skill.
It is. And they've been hiding it, right? They've got their little shameful things that they've been hiding. So I want to talk a little bit about that because we want to give ourselves permission to stop ignoring that stuff. That stuff hurts us when we don't fix it. So as all of these incredible entrepreneurs listening to this are sort of reflecting on their weak spots, their niggling things, some people are so in denial of their things that they're like, okay, I don't even know what my things are. Everything is fine. I just give me the tool, the technique, the secret sauce, the whatever to get me to that next level. I really want to hone in on how do people find their weak areas so that they can give it the attention it needs so that they can fix those things, which actually are the holes in their bucket, so to speak.
Okay, so I would define weak spots and niggly things as two different things. Okay, so if we're talking about like particularly weak spots are sort of, I would usually combine them to entrepreneurs or management level type CEOs, owners, founders. Weak spots in that instance, we do one of two things. We deny that we're not good at something and we pretend that we are. Or we avoid doing the thing altogether so we don't have a weak spot. From the perspective of those people that I mentioned, though, you're supposed to be good at the thing that you're supposed to be good at. You're actually not supposed to be good at everything. So your weak spots are actually opportunities to bring in people that have strengths in those areas to build a network of high-performing everybody's. Right? Because like you can do a lot of things, but you can't master all of them. You're not supposed to. So if you bring in the mastery on all of those levels, you automatically are up leveling anything that you're touching, anything that you're doing, anything you're trying to get to. So they're not necessarily weak spots. They're just not strengths. Right? And so in those instances, I would 100% tell you to not bother with your weaknesses, not ignore them, put somebody in place or put something in place that levels that weakness up to a strength for the whole of the ecosystem. But you should just focus on your strengths. That is really what you should do, is develop and move forward to those strengths. Be aware of your weaknesses, know when you need to bring people in, bring ideas in or change and move, pivot, do something to work around or with those weaknesses. But there's no point trying to develop them, because it's not in your best interest to work with your weaknesses, right? It's in your best interest to work alongside them, not with them.
I love it.
When we're talking about niggly things are usually systems, policies, processes, or all of those things that haven't been put in place. So they're usually, like, I would say a niggly thing is, like, as you grow, companies tend to lean on tech instead of people. And so as you put tech in place, you lose an element of something within your business that you don't realize because you're scrambling to keep up with growth, or you're trying to keep costs at a minimum. And the tech doesn't replace everything that you tried, like everything that existed before that made that thing or that process, that department, a good operating system. The tech will not replace everything. You think it does, but it won't. So the thing that you lost in that system, that's the niggly thing. Okay, because one of those things that you lost will have contributed to your success. And when you're on, like I said, that momentum of growth, and kind of growth sort of just finding you and coming in on streams, and you won't notice that that thing is lost. But when you try and do the next big thing, or you try and pivot, or you try and reassess or expand your physical premise, then that's when that thing becomes a problem. Or when you have like a disconnect between, when companies are siloed, not that I like the idea of using that language, but when companies are siloed because they grew and they put this department over here and they put this department on floor 7 and this one on floor 3, and they never meet or talk to each other, that niggly thing, the thing that you think that's still being done between all of that ecosystem, but they're not even touching each other anymore, those are the niggly things. And the reason that we ignore them is, well, there's a number of reasons. The main one is because you're on that growth momentum. The pain points for those coming up, they don't surface until you're really in trouble. 2, you have, you could potentially have a really great employee that's doing the work or the heavy lifting of 5 people and fixing that gap that's being created. But all you're doing is actually probably burning out somebody that you're going to lose in a year or 2 years because they'll move to a different company because they're overworked and undercompensated. And there's nothing that you as a company are not looking at the system to fix it for that person. And they are very aware of that. So those kinds of things, they're niggly things. We ignore them because, particularly at a founder or a CEO or a board level, we don't have to deal with them on a daily basis. So it's very easy to ignore them. In a small business, the owner's usually so busy being the everything to everybody that somebody probably mentions it and it probably goes on the list of 50 million things to do. And what the small business guy needs is somebody to deal with, like, the complaints box, right? It's literally the internal company complaining about the things, because when somebody quits your company, when somebody leaves or resigns, they are your greatest tell on what's wrong with your business, providing that they're not, disgruntled and angry and just want to, tell you a bunch of nasty things. They are actually the best intel. They're like listening to a disgruntled customer. They will tell you everything that's wrong with your business because they're the reason that they're leaving. But most people just hand in their letter of resignation and a manager goes, okay, sorry to lose you, but I've got now 50 million things to do and I have to fill your position, so I'm off to do that. And they don't actually listen to all the niggly things that person could let them in on. So the secret sauce that everybody's looking for, the magical formula, is actually there's not one. It doesn't exist. You paying attention, like you said before, paying attention to, like, people have paying attention to themselves, being self-aware enough to realize that there's even something to look at or needs to be looked at. It's a matter of actually looking. It's not seeing, it's actually looking.
That's so good. So good. Actually, both of those things that you touched on, from the perspective of upper management, CEO, there's weak spots or weaknesses, right? And how to leverage other people's strengths and focus on your own. And then this piece here, which is so true in probably everybody's business. Even the solopreneur has these niggly things, right? Those areas where they're sort of just not paying attention because they're over here doing this, or the small business owner who knows that there is a problem because he's got too much turnover, but is not willing to look at why. Those conversations that are not being had with not even just the employees that are quitting, but the employees that you have, and saying, hey, how's it going? Right there, you give them an opportunity, they're going to tell you,
Yeah.
hey, I can't deal with this person being this way all the time, or this is missing and it's making my job impossible, or whatever it is. Just not taking that time is not having the awareness within our own business, that same type of awareness that we need to have for ourselves when we've got a nagging ache or pain, or we notice that our kids are acting out and we are too busy to deal with it, or whatever the thing is. The signs and symptoms are always there if we're willing to look at them.
And I think that one of the biggest reasons that particularly small businesses don't want to look at problems or listen to, and it's not that they won't listen or deal with them. Sometimes they don't have time. Sometimes they have absolutely no idea how to fix them. And they're just like, hey, deal with it because this is just where we're at right now. And I've worked in those businesses. I know what that's like, right? But the problem is people think that fixing problems is going to cost them money. And that really, like at the end of the day, when they're trying to make money, they don't want to spend any money that they think spending money on sales and marketing and more product is what's going to make them grow. They don't realize that the problems that they think are going to cost them money are actually costing them more money than anything that they could possibly put on the front end of the company. Like I've worked with businesses that have, near on $1 million revenue turnover every year and have gone broke because their problems cost them so much money that they cannot fix them in time, but they're making enough money to cover expenses, right? So you can't. People are always worried about what's going to cost them money. They're not worried about what is costing them money.
Let that sink in.
I got really excited about that because it's just one thing that is one of the first things that I'm in there when I get with a client. The first thing is noticing like how much money this is actually costing you.
That there were a lot of really good takeaways, but that is a powerful one. It's a principle that oftentimes I use when I'm doing deep mindset work with a client, whether it is hypnosis or even just, coaching or some type of subconscious reconditioning, is we have to look at what is this costing you? What is it doing to you? What is the outcome of this going to be in 6 months, a year? It's not just the short-term effect. It is, what is this doing to your life? What are you losing? What are you missing out on? What is this going to create for you if you continue this pattern? And oftentimes we're deceiving ourselves. We're trying to ignore that thing, like you said, because there's a fear, some other stupid fear, right? In the case of the business owner, it may be the fear of what is this going to cost me. In the case of the individual with whatever their personal problem is, there's always some fear that is keeping us from looking at a solution, an improvement. Oh, well, if I do this, then that bad thing that I don't want to experience is going to happen. And that's the reason that we don't change the very thing we need to change in order to get to where we want to be.
It's either one thing. And so this is very ironic because in personal development and in business, it's exactly the same, is that the thing that you are doing that you think you like, the thing you're doing is getting you the result that you don't want, right? You're already doing it because you keep getting the result you don't want. So it isn't a matter of doing anything to not get what you don't want. It's a matter of stopping doing the so that you can get what you want. Because all you have to do is stop doing the thing and the result will change.
So good. Jamie, I think we've gone over time. And so I want to make sure our listeners know how they can get in contact with you.
The best way to contact me is my website, www.9carat.net, or my personal LinkedIn, which is Jamie Meyer Enterprises.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today, Jamie. It's been a ton of fun.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I've enjoyed it.
And thank you to all of our listeners. You know we're doing this for you. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.